Inflation has hit everyone hard lately, and Sweden is no exception. I decided to see what you can get for $100 in Stockholm these days. Stockholm used to be infamously expensive. You had to sell a kidney to afford a visit to the capital of Sweden. But the Swedish krona has decreased a lot in value compared to the euro and the US dollar, so maybe things are different these days. There's only one way to find out. I'm gonna explore more or less touristy things to do in the city and see what $100 gets you today. $100 is roughly 1,020 Swedish krona these days. A couple of years ago that used to be more like 800 krona, but those days are long since gone. Good for you, horrible for us. I see a lot of people online ask if you should take out cash when you visit Sweden. I also see a lot of questions about using dollars or writing checks and whatnot. Do not take out cash in Sweden, and don't wave around your dollar bills either, and don't even think about trying to pay for anything with a check. Sweden is very much a cashless society. You won't be able to use cash in most stores and restaurants. You need a debit or credit card instead. And you definitely can't pay with dollars either, so leave those dollars in your bank account. They won't do you any good at all as physical cash. Getting around in Stockholm is quick and convenient. There's a lot of public transport. Buses and trams and commuter trains and subways, oh, and ferries too. All of this costs a flat fee of 42 Swedish krona for a single ride. If you plan on visiting many different parts of Stockholm, a 24-hour travel pass will cost you 175 krona, but I actually prefer a different mode of transport. Voi electric scooters have a day pass for 79 krona. For traveling inside the city center, that's actually cheaper and faster than public transport. So that's my choice for how to zoom around the city and be a complete menace to pedestrians and drivers alike. No, seriously, drive safely, don't be an Something you definitely want to do as a visitor in Stockholm is to find some nice authentic souvenirs to bring home. In that case, you have to avoid all the gift shops in Old Town. They're about as Swedish as tropical beaches and happy smiles. Not very Swedish at all, in other words. What you're looking for is things like glassware or good old Pippi Longstocking items. Or maybe a dalahäst, a Dalecarlian horse. You can actually find those in the touristy gift shops, so maybe you do want to go there after all. If you do buy a dalahäst, it's between 129 kronor and many hundred depending on size, so I'm not gonna include it in this list. I'd go for some other souvenirs. Salty licorice is horrible, but it's very Swedish. You can find some pretty simple but good licorice for 69 kronor at Lakritsroten in Old Town. If you want even cheaper licorice, you can find similar salty licorice for 23 kronor at grocery stores. And you get it in kitty shapes that way. You can also find some knäckebröd, some Swedish crisp bread at grocery stores. That'll cost you roughly 15 kronor. But most of all, I think you need an osthyvel, a cheese slicer. It's actually a really convenient tool to have, and you can find one in every Swedish household. An osthyvel at IKEA will cost you 29 kronor. After all that shopping, you want to enjoy some good old Swedish fika. During the 1600s, coffee was introduced to Sweden, and by the 1700s and 1800s, pastry bakeries became popular as well. Around 1910, those two were combined into something people called Swedish fika. I've talked about the semla before, a very typical Swedish treat, and everyone knows about Swedish cinnamon buns. You know, the proper ones, not the ones covered in white gunk like in America. But I thought I'd suggest something different. Try a cardamom bun instead of a cinnamon bun. They look very similar, but the taste is cardamom instead of cinnamon. Well, obviously. Now you're full of energy and you want to do something really nice. Let's travel to the archipelago. You could go to Fjäderholmarna, the Feather Islands. It's very popular and there's plenty of restaurants and things to see there. A round trip would cost you 205 kronor. It used to be 165, but, well, inflation. As an alternative, you can also go to Vaxholm a bit further out for 104 kronor one way or 208 round trip with Vaxholmsbolaget. However, you can also go to Vaxholm with public transport, so my recommendation would be to take the boat there one way with Vaxholmsbolaget for 104 and then take public transport back for 42 kronor. Either way, the archipelago is a lovely place to visit and I love boats, so I highly recommend it. Stockholm is famous for its many museums, and a very central one is the Nobel Prize Museum. It would cost you 140 Swedish krona to visit that one, but I don't think you should. I wouldn't say that the Nobel Prize Museum is a bad museum, but it's definitely not one of the best. Most people find it a bit underwhelming. Another museum that's pretty questionable is the Viking Museum. It's not really so much a museum as an exhibition about Viking life. I like it personally, but many people find it a bit disappointing. You might want to go to Birka instead if you want a proper historical Viking experience. You could also visit the Vasa Museum, the ABBA Museum, Fotografiska and the Nordic Museum. All of those are pretty good in my view. But they are pretty expensive, so I thought I'd mention some cheaper alternatives. You can visit the Stockholm City Museum for free, and also the Royal Armoury. There's plenty to see in both of those museums, and they won't cost you a single krona. But if you want to visit a museum you have to pay for, my recommendation is the combined open-air museum and zoo, Skansen. A ticket there costs 265 kronor during high season and 200 during low season. While you're visiting Skansen, you can also explore the island of Djurgården, which is totally free. It's a lovely area filled with lush greenery, or at least it is during summer. You can also take a stroll in Gamla Stan, Stockholm Old Town. There you can have a look at Stortorget, where the Stockholm bloodbath took place in 1520. And you can also say hi to Järnpojke, my favorite sculpture in all of Stockholm. It's really funny how people are starting to dress up Järnpojke and giving him offerings too. I can understand the scarf, winter is coming after all, but the candy and the money? This is weird. Please keep doing it though, it's awesome to see. And if you get tired of Old Town, you can also take a walk along Kungsholms Strandstig on the northern part of the island of Kungsholmen. There's a lovely pond where you can feed ducks, and if you don't see any ducks, you can sit on a bench and drink a bottle of wine. I'm not saying that I do that often, but I'm not saying that I don't. If you want to get an elevated view of Stockholm, you can visit Skinnerviksberget. But since this video is about things that cost money, let's visit Katarina hissen instead, the Katarina Elevator. You haven't been able to ride this elevator for 13 years, but it just recently opened up again. It actually broke down a week after it was opened again, so let's hope it stays open now. I was gonna say that it costs 20 kronor to ride the elevator, but it's actually free. I'm not sure when that change happened. Now let's talk about shopping. Or maybe let's not, because it's too expensive to include in this list. You won't really find much for under $100 if you're visiting the most popular stores. NK, Nordiska Kompaniet, is a popular place for doing some shopping, but it's pretty expensive. I'm guessing this is the plus-size collection. The mall Gallerian just across the street from NK is another popular and slightly less pricey place to shop. There's also a lot of shopping along this street, Drottninggatan. You can find a lot of typical Swedish brands here, like H&M. Even though H&M is actually closed right now, they're refurbishing. But if you're a budget-conscious traveler, or if you care about the environment, then you might want to check out second-hand stores instead. I'm still not gonna include any clothes in this list because even secondhand can be pretty expensive, especially since it's also quite trendy. Especially places like Beyond Retro, that's quite a pricey store. If you want to find cheaper things, you can, for example, go to the secondhand store Myrorna instead. It's a chain of charity secondhand stores all around Stockholm. The name actually means the ants in Swedish, but I don't think that you'll get any ants home with you when you buy stuff here. Now let's talk about food. You want to have dinner when you're visiting Stockholm, and that could actually end up pretty expensive. There's a lot of popular places, Garlic and Shots for example, where everything has garlic in it, including the beer and the desserts. iFood is a Viking-themed restaurant that you might believe is a tourist trap, but it's actually really cool. I like it. For the finer things in life, you could visit Villa Gothem or Ulla Vinblad on the island of Djurgården. I'm definitely not going there today, that's pearls for swine, but they are really popular and expensive. Den Gyllene Freden is Stockholm's oldest restaurant and it can be found in Old Town. Carl Michael Bellman, a very famous Swedish songwriter from the 1700s, visited that restaurant, so it's a place with a pedigree. But it's also pretty expensive, so I'm not going there either. No, instead I'm gonna indulge in a proper Swedish delicacy. I'm not talking about Swedish meatballs or herring or falukorv or Swedish dumplings. No, I'm of course talking about good old Swedish kebab pizza. Kebab pizza was invented in Sweden in the 1980s, and it's the most popular and most beloved pizza in Sweden. This wonderful unholy abomination is the food of heroes and Vikings, and it'll set you back approximately 145 kronor. Mankind can't survive on food alone, you also need drink. And when I'm talking about drinks, I'm of course talking about alcohol. One of the worst, or possibly best, dive bars in Stockholm used to be called Carmen, but it's actually closed right now. Luckily, there's another classic dive bar right next to it called Söderkällaren. There you can find beer for 49 Swedish krona, or actually 39 during happy hour, but right now it's a very unhappy hour, so we'll have to count it as 49. Either way, it's much better than 100 or even more that you have to pay at the pubs around the central station. But I have a feeling that you're not going to be satisfied with just a beer. You also want a classy cocktail, right? Now where to go for a cocktail in Stockholm? A fancy sky bar maybe? Or maybe a cozy lounge? Absolutely not. Let's go to the Nerds bar, where you can get a Donkey Kong cocktail for 144 Swedish krona. And if you want to, you can also rent an old gaming system for 150 krona per person. But that would actually put us above the budget of $100, so this is a good place to call it a day. So that's roughly what you get for $100 in Stockholm today. I hope you found it interesting and possibly even a bit useful. Like and subscribe, but most importantly, have a great day.